Pod documentation is mostly used for modules. It certainly can be used for any Perl code, but it's mostly used for modules. Let's take a look at how that is typically done. Make a working copy of this module here, and we'll call it example.pm. We'll go ahead and open that up, and we'll take a look at the pod documentation down here at the bottom. You'll notice that at the end of the code, we have this end directive, and then the pod documentation begins from there. Here we have a pod directive. It's the equal sign followed by head 1. That makes a level 1 heading. And we have the word name for the heading. After that, we have just a paragraph of text and then another level 1 heading that says synopsis, some more text, and another level 1 heading. Then we have this over directive, and that makes an indent of 4 characters. And then we have an item directive, and these could be bullet items. They're not always formatted with bullets. How it's formatted depends on the pod processor. The typical pod processor is pretty plain. Here we have a formatting code. This one is B for bold. This word will be in bold. The formatting codes are 1 letter and then angle brackets around whatever it is that they operate on. Then we have a couple more paragraphs, another item, and then back, this undoes the indenting of the over, and that's pretty much it. Then at the end, there's a cut. You could actually have more Perl code after that, except that I used this end directive, and that will prevent any other Perl code from coming after this. But this is typically the way that it's done. Pod documentation can be, and you'll sometimes see it interspersed with the code. Most people put it all the way at the end, and that's the really convenient way to do it. So let's take a look at what this looks like in the Perl doc processor and type in template, and that'll go ahead and bring up the documentation for this module. Maximize that so you can see it, and that's what the documentation looks like. It's common to use this format. You have name, and then you give the name and a single dash and a 1-line description. Synopsis is used for how the code is used, and then methods for the different methods in the module. And here we have the new method and what it does, the method, which is just a placeholder where you can create your own, the author and the history. And this is all created by this pod documentation. Looking in detail, head 1 creates a level 1 head. There are 4 possible levels of headings. So we could have head 2 and call it something else, and a head 3 and call it yet another. And if we look at that, go ahead and save this and close this and bring that up and type in example. So you see that something else is indented a little more, yet another is indented a little bit more. That's how those work. You'll also notice that sometimes I have the text all the way over to the left and sometimes I have it indented. There's a reason for that. When text is all the way over to the left, it's formatted like a paragraph. For example, if I were to take this line here and just duplicate it a few times and save that and look at it in the pod documentation, then we see that it gets formatted like a paragraph. It ignores these new lines and just wraps it around however it wants to. On the other hand, if the line is indented at all, it will format it literally. And so you see up at the top here where we have that synopsis, it's indented, but it's also formatted literally. I have one line after the other. So when you have an example of code, you always need to indent it a little bit so that it stays formatted the way that you intend it in the documentation. And we'll just get rid of those. That's pretty much how pod documentation works. Of course, there are a few other commands, there are a few other formatting codes, and some other details. And if you look in the Perl documentation and you search for Perl pod, you'll get the entire documentation on how pod documentation works and all of the different options that are available.